Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Barry Levitt, board member of Genealogical Society of Marion County. I have the pleasure of introducing you, some of you probably already know, Steve Barnett, the executive director of the Irvington Historical Society. Steve Barnett was raised in Irvington and attended school 57, Howe High School, class of 63, and received a degree from Purdue University, class of 1970. Served in the Indiana National Guard. After a brief hiatus from Irvington, Steve returned to his hometown in 1977 with his wife Sue, so their 3 children could grow up in a family-friendly environment. Steve had the good fortune of working with United States Representative Andy Jacobs Jr. and United States Representative Julia Carson in the Indianapolis Congressional District Office, helping constituents. After his retirement, Steve became the executive director of the Irvington Historical Society and curator of the Bona Thompson Memorial Center. Steve was commissioned a Kentucky colonel by Governor Wallace Wilkinson for service to veterans, and he was appointed a Sagamore of the Wabash by Governor Joseph Kernan for service to Indiana. In 2016, Steve was named Marion County Historian. Take it away, Steve.
Okay. Thank you, Barry. The program today, First Families of Marion County. I did this as a spin-off, basically, to the First Families that were created by the Genealogy Society. I thought it'd be interesting to do a little program on the First Families. And also, 2022 is the 200th anniversary of the founding of Marion County. So we are still in 2022, so it's very appropriate to do this program. While governments are not known for their humor, sometimes their actions can be pretty funny. For example, when the Indiana General Assembly met in Corydon for its 6th session in December 1821, to conduct the serious business of enacting laws for the state, a bill creating Marion County passed and was approved by Governor Jonathan Jennings on December 31st, with the provision that it would take effect on April 1st, 1822. April Fool's Day. Maybe the statesman of the day made this provision in case they had second thoughts. The Lenape, or Delaware, were the dominant Native American tribe in the portion of central Indiana that would include Marion County and the adjacent counties. They had such good relations with white settlers that Chief Anderson gave permission to Jacob Wetzel to cut a trace from the Whitewater Valley in eastern Indiana to the bluffs of White River, which was done in the summer of 1818. The following October, the Treaty of St. Mary's was concluded between the United States and the Miami, Delaware, and other tribes, by which these Native Americans ceded a vast tract of land in central Indiana, south of the Wabash River. Known as the New Purchase, the portion that would become Marion County was part of the lands ceded by the Delaware, who had 3 years to leave the area. It was an area of dense forest and marshy grounds. The first person to arrive in what would become Marion County was a native of North Carolina by the name of Ute Perkins. Little is known of Perkins. He was about 27 years old, married, and a basket weaver by profession. He came from the Whitewater area of eastern Indiana by way of the Indian Trail that would become known as Brookville Road sometime in 1819. Perkins stopped briefly at a Delaware village beside what is now Buck Creek in southeastern Marion County, before continuing his journey to an area known today as Pogues Run and East Michigan Street, where he built a cabin. Perkins stayed long enough to be recorded in the August 1820 census before leaving because he didn't like living in the dense, dark woods with howling wolves and roaring panthers. His wife probably had something to say about it too. He spent the rest of his days south of Rushville in a cabin on Brookville Road. John McCormick and George Pogue soon followed in Perkins' path from the Whitewater. As to who arrived first after Perkins is still a matter of contention. McCormick arrived on February 26, 1820, at the confluence of White River and Fall Creek and built his cabin the same day. Located just north of what is now a pedestrian way across the old Washington Street Bridge, the McCormick cabin served as the first tavern in the area. Pogue, a blacksmith, initially lived in the cabin Ute Perkins had temporarily vacated, but soon built a double log cabin just to the north of the Perkins cabin. It is acknowledged that Pogue arrived in March, but it was at 1819 or 1820. An early settler, Dr. Samuel Mitchell, wrote in 1822 issue of the Indianapolis Gazette that Pogue arrived in March 1820. Cyrus Wetzel of the Bluffs near Waverly in Johnson County confirms Mitchell's account. Mrs. McCormick was quoted in an 1870 newspaper article in the summer that, quote, in the summer of 1819, McCormick, George Pogue, and others left Connorsville and came to this city, then a wilderness, and after prospecting up and down White River, selected a site and returned to Connorsville, end quote. McCormick left Connorsville in 1820, Mitchell in January of 1820. Mitchell's article has been cited in later sources, but unfortunately this issue of the Gazette has not survived. John Nolan, who came with his family to Indianapolis in the fall of 1820 and wrote profiles of some of the early settlers, also upholds the McCormick claim. It seems reasonable that McCormick, Pogue, and others would explore the area before coming to settle. In April 1821, Pogue left his family at their cabin and went in search of some missing horses. He was never seen again and presumed to have met with foul play. The site of the McCormick cabin is marked today with a bronze tablet embedded in a large boulder near the old Washington Street Bridge. Others anxious to stake a claim in the new territory with its profusion of game, its fertility, and its abundance of excellent building material quickly followed in the spring of 1820. Among them were John Maxwell and John Cohen, who settled on the high ground along Fall Creek, very near the site of the former Wishart Hospital. Robert Harding and his brothers Samuel, Eliakim, Israel, and Laban, who came with their widowed mother, built cabins near McCormick, and Miller Isaac Wilson, who built a double cabin on what is now the northeast corner of the State House grounds. The Wilson cabin was the first house of any kind built on the original town plat of Indianapolis. Scattered away from the White River and Fall Creek settlement, other intrepid settlers erected cabins in the wilderness. When the commissioners appointed to select the site for the new state capitol at the McCormick cabin in June 1820, there were at least 15 families living in the vicinity, many along the banks of Fall Creek and White River. The vast area of the new purchase, now named Delaware County, would not be completely surveyed until the fall of 1820, and its lands offered for sale until 1821. Those living in the county when John Maxwell took the census in August 1820 were therefore squatters. He recorded 327 households with 1,348 persons, including 3 free African American men living in the district, with most of the squatters concentrated in the central part of the county. Little is known of Maxwell. He lived on the east bank of White River near today's 16th Street Bridge. His wife died in July 1821 of the sickness, the first woman to die in Indianapolis. In April 1822, after Marion County was organized, Maxwell was appointed Justice of the Peace, the first county judicial officer. Aaron Wallace was one of the 3 African Americans recorded in the census. He had arrived in March with John Cohen. The commissioner's selection of the site of the new state capitol was instrumental in bringing additional settlers into the future lands. During the fall and winter of 1820-21, these included Morris, John and James Gibbon, James M. Ray, Nathaniel Cox, Thomas Anderson, John Hawkins, Dr. Livingston Dunlap, David Wood, Daniel Andes, Dr. Isaac Coe, Douglas McGuire, who built cabins clustered closely along the riverbank, while John Stevens, David Johnson, Isaac Cool, Hiram Bacon, Harris Tyner, Martin D. Bush, and John Graham built their cabins in the outlying areas. Others like Matthias Nolan, a mason, merchant Daniel Schaefer, and Taylor Andrew Vine settled on land little away from the river that would become Indianapolis. All who had settled in the area before the summer of 1821 were squatters. Indianapolis was not platted until the summer, and the sale of lots did not take place until October 1821. The risk that squatters took can be seen in the case of Uncle Billy Thompson. He built his cabin on what would be platted as Kentucky Avenue and had to move. He ended up in Perry Township, far from any site that might be future platted for the city. Many of the early settlers built their cabins along the east bank of White River on either side of what would become Washington Street. After Indianapolis lots were sold, the settlement extended along either side of the Washington Street corridor, south Meridian Street, and around the eastern half of the circle. Most of the outlying parts of Marion County had few scattered settlers. Perry Township was the exception. There were several clusters of cabins, notably around Bluff Road and Buck Creek, on Pleasant Run south of Glens Valley, and around Bluff Road and Pleasant Run, where African-American brothers Mark and Daniel Harris settled on the land. Settlers came to the wilderness for a variety of reasons. Jeremiah Corbally wrote, quote, "I am working for myself and not for landlords," quote. Morris was unwilling to raise his family amid the influence of slavery in Kentucky. Others, like Dr. Samuel Mitchell, saw the coming to the wilderness as an opportunity for a fresh start. He had been a member of the Kentucky legislature, and after losing his property, he arrived in the spring of 1821. Dr. Mitchell was the first president of the Medical Society of Indianapolis and was an appointed surgeon with the Indiana militia during the Black Hawk War. Tragically, both his wife and daughter died within a few years after their arrival in Indianapolis. Dr. Mitchell was a good-natured, large, corpulent man. After suffering a stroke, he was cared for by friends in Piqua, Ohio, where he died in 1837. Accompanying Dr. Mitchell was Ephraim Ensaw, a teenager who was one of the first African Americans in Indianapolis. When he was about 18, Ensaw went to Springfield, Illinois, where he later married. A plentiful supply of ginseng, one of the area's natural resources, brought speculators to the dark woods. James Blake arrived in the summer of 1821 from Philadelphia to harvest and process the plant for export to China. He also helped in the survey of Indianapolis. During the sickness that broke out soon after his arrival, Blake gathered and by hand grated new corn into meal and mush to feed those suffering fever and ague. In addition to his commercial interest, Blake was selected along with Dr. Mitchell to lobby the state legislature at Corydon to create Marion County. Although he was 30 years old and known as the Old Bachelor, his marital status soon changed when he went back east and married a Baltimore woman. Blake and his bride returned to Indianapolis in the first pleasure carriage to appear in the area. He also arranged for the first piano to come to Indianapolis. Blake, along with Samuel Henderson, built the first good hotel and first frame house in Indianapolis. His other business interests included the first steam mill, the Indianapolis Rolling Mill, and the Madison and Indianapolis Railroad. He was also a partner in the first wholesale dry goods store. Blake organized the first Sabbath school at Caleb Scudder's cabinet shop, and he was a prime mover in the Indiana branch of the American Colonization Society. He was president of the Indianapolis Benevolent Society. Caleb Scudder, a cabinet maker, came in the summer of 1821, and his arrival had a macabre beginning. It was the time of the sickness, so his skills in cabinetry were employed in making coffins. He built his first shop on the south side of the State House Square, and it became the site of the first Sunday school. Scudder was a Center Township Justice of the Peace for many years, and later served as mayor of Indianapolis in the 1850s. The sign painter Samuel Rooker was German, and so he spelled Caleb Scudder with it was on the sign, which you can't really see very much. The sign on the building was Caleb with a K, Scudder with a couple of K's in there, and cabinet maker with K too. Samuel Rooker also, as a sign painter, painted a sign for a tavern down in Franklin Township along what would be Southeastern Avenue. And it was a painting of General Lafayette, a tavern, I presumably called Lafayette Tavern. But it seemed that in painting the sign, he failed to leave room for the feet. And so and I wish we had this painting, a picture of General Lafayette basically with his feet cut off at his knees. So I don't know beyond that. I guess he was the only sign painter, so that's why he got the jobs. Proficiency was not his highest quality. The government lands in Delaware County, the new purchase, went on sale in the first part of 1821, and in July most of the squatters had become landholders. At $1.25 or $26 an acre to many, it was too good of a deal to pass up. Also, a few settlers were recently appointed to government officials who came to carry out their duties. Others living within the boundaries of the future Marion County were Joseph Beeler, William Rector, James Harmon, Peter Harmonson, Henry Riddle, Henry Cruz, and Martin McCoy. Beeler settled on the west side of the White River near the bluffs that would serve as Decatur Township trustee, Justice of the Peace, for many years. He was among the first to bring improved breeds of cattle, sheep, and hogs into the county. Rector came to the future Franklin Township and built his cabin along the banks of Buck Creek, where he raised a large number of hogs and drove them to slaughterhouses in Cincinnati. Rector was also an evangelist of the Methodist Church and would later go to Iowa to organize Methodist congregations. Harmon settled in on the east bank of Eagle Creek in the future Pike Township. Cruz and McCoy were among the early settlers in the area that would become Washington Township, while Riddle and Harmonson built their cabins along either side of Buck Creek near present-day Bluff Road. Harmonson would serve as the first Justice of the Peace in Perry Township. Former Indiana Lieutenant Governor Christopher Harrison was named one of the three commissioners to meet on April 2nd, 1821 at the site of the new Capitol and appoint surveyors. Harrison was the only commissioner to show up and appointed surveyor Alexander Ralston, who set about platting Indianapolis, a town 1 square mile. Ralston was accompanied by his African-American housekeeper, Chainley Lively. Dr. Samuel Mitchell also arrived at this time with his African-American boy named Ephraim Insaw. Ralston completed his survey, and the first sale of lots were auctioned off on the Monday, October 8, 1821, at the Matthias Nolan Tavern under the supervision of General John Carr, the land agent appointed for the state. The first lot sold, Lot 3, square 70, which is now 401 West Washington Street, and is the current site of a parking garage. Went to Jesse McKay for $152.75, or in current money, $3,222. But because the weather was so cold and raw with high winds, additional sales were postponed until the next day. When the sale concluded the following Saturday, 314 lots had been sold for a total of $7,119.25, or approximately 149. Well, I've updated the price. $149,918. While the main settlement was near the river, a sickness during the summer caused most buyers to purchase lands to the north and east away from the waterways. In December 1821, Nathaniel Bolton arrived with his wife Sarah Barrett Bolton. He was a bookbinder by trade, and in January 1822, along with his stepfather George Smith, Bolton began printing the Indianapolis Gazette, the first newspaper. The Boltons lived west of White River in an area named Mount Jackson that would become the site of Central State Hospital. Sarah Bolton became a poet. Heavy continuous rains during the summer of 1821 caused the streams to run deep and overflow their banks, and the wooded land remained swampy for most of the season. There was a general dampness in the air and little wind to carry off the miasmic vapors from the wet vegetation. By August, fevers of a peculiar type began laying people prostrate. Out of several hundred cases, 25 died, mostly children, and were buried in the plague cemetery near the cabin of Robert Barnhill, who also succumbed to the illness, which most likely was malaria. The only settlers to escape the malady were Thomas Chin, Enoch Banks, and Nancy Hendricks. Northwest of Meridian Street and North Streets, a heavy wooded area of more than 150 acres that had been killed some years earlier by insects, was cleared and enclosed as a common field for growing corn and vegetables. This land, known as the Caterpillar Deadening, was of great benefit to the early settlers because it was readily available for cultivation and saved much heavy labor of clearing the dense forest. A year before the organization of Marion County, John Maxwell was appointed the first Justice of the Peace, and Jeremiah Corberly was named the first constable. Calvin Fletcher was the only lawyer available. The organization of Marion County townships occurred also at this time, and with the appointment of William Wick as the judge. Harvey Bates was sheriff. Actually, it's Herbie Bates. I'm not sure exactly where Herbie comes from. It's a weird name. Bates came to Marion County in 1822 from Connersville after his appointment. He was subsequently elected sheriff to a 2-year term. Bates later served as Indianapolis town treasurer and as president of the branch of the state bank. While he had a number of business interests, including First Insurance Company, Bates is best known for the hotel he built. Both assumed office in February 1822, and an election was held April 3rd to fill the other offices. Those elected were James McElvine and Eliakim Harding, associate judges. James M. Ray, a coach lacemaker, was elected clerk. Joseph Reed, recorder, John McCormick, John T. Osborne, and William McCartney were county commissioners. Court sessions were held in General Carr's cabin until a courthouse was built. From the village of Darkwood, the first families of Indianapolis and Marion County met the challenges of nature and adversity. Their perseverance and that of succeeding generations built a thriving metropolis over 2 centuries that stands today as a testimony to the initial vision of these founding families. And some of the sources, and you can find these online, there is One is called Early Reminiscences of Indianapolis by John Noland, written in 1870. Also, Barry Sulgrove included extensive information on the county's first residents in his History of Indianapolis and Marion County, 1884. Other sources are Logan's 1868 History of Indianapolis from 1818 by Ignatius Brown, and 1870 Indianapolis, a historical and statistical sketch of the railroad city by William R. Holloway. Thank you very much.